You are listening to the free version of last month's Patreon Party People podcast. To get the newest, most current podcasts as soon as they go live, simply visit patreon.com/blazehedgehog and pledge $1 or more. Patreon donors also get custom RSS feeds to download the podcast straight into their favorite listening device. And Patreon isn't just for podcasts. There's a plethora of bonus content, including artwork, downloadable games, and secret videos that are only available to donors. Donating is also the best way to show your support for everything I do. If you've ever enjoyed my blog, thought my videos were cool, liked my games, or whatever else, consider donating something. Just go to patreon.com/blazehedgehog to learn more about the multiple different ways you can show your support. Once again, that is patreon.com/blazehedgehog. Hello and welcome to the Patreon Party People podcast. It is Friday, October 25th, 2019, and chances are by the time you hear this, it'll probably be the 26th or the 27th. But whatever the case may be, I am still, and as always, your host, Ryan Bloom. Sorry about the delay in getting this podcast out, folks. It has been an extremely busy time for me. The plan was to have 2 podcasts out in December, like I said, but I was so busy getting ready for everything else that there just kind of wasn't time to do anything. And I'll just admit straight up, my cousin was meant to join me for this podcast, because he got, set up in his new place. He kind of has like a recording studio in his basement now, and he figured he could join the podcast, and I was going to have him on. But he's only really available in like evenings and nights, and I had a window here just after noon, and I figured I'd take that window and I'd record the podcast as quickly as possible because I'm kind of the only person in the apartment right now. So I figured, here we are. He's not here. Maybe he'll join us next month. I'm not really sure. Things should be slowing down here for me once I get through some important stuff here. We'll say by the end of October, early November. I suppose we could just get right into it. Not long after I recorded the belated August podcast in September, first thing I did was record a bunch of Dare to Scare videos. I'm not sure if I'd started recording those by the time I mentioned the last podcast. I think the Patreon exclusive videos had gone up by then, but I hadn't recorded the main videos yet. So basically, right after that podcast, I recorded like 5 episodes in a row. I promise at the end of the 5th one that there will be a 6th episode. I believe I say it's Bendy in the Ink Machine. With as busy as I am with everything else, I don't think I'm going to be able to get around to that. Not before Halloween is over anyway. And I thought, maybe substituting Bendy in the Ink Machine for something else. A new version, like a new fan remake of PT just came out that claims to be so accurate that it's a PT emulator. I kind of wanted to try that out on video. But yeah, I don't know. There's a way I could download PT onto my PS4 Pro. And I haven't gotten around to doing that yet. I've tried all the fan remakes of PT. I don't know if anyone wants to see PT anymore. That game's old. Death Stranding is coming out soon. And that's a whole different kettle of fish that I can't tackle, but I don't think it's a big surprise to say that PT is a scary game. So I don't know. Point is, there probably won't be a 6th episode. It'll probably end at episode 5. I don't remember what that 5th episode was now, because I recorded it like over a month ago at this point. Almost 2 months ago, really. But yeah, just that's how I started after that podcast. Right in the middle of that, doing all those Dare to Scare videos, Sage happened. The Sonic Amateurs Games. I can't talk because I'm trying to hurry through this list. I actually have limited time to record this. Anyway, in the middle of recording those Dare to Scare videos, the Sonic Amateur Games Expo started. Sage, that old thing. And, obviously I cover that for TSSZ News. I write reviews, I play all the games. Didn't play all the games this year, though. I just didn't have time because since it killed me so badly last year, reviewing it was like 87 games last year. And I ended up getting like super burnt out, I think, as you guys know. I meant to take the holidays off, and it ended up being like I ended up not going back and starting like more YouTube videos and things like that almost until like April, I want to say. It was a really long time. I was really burnt out last year cuz it wasn't just Sage last year, it was like the Sonic hacking contest right after that. And again, I think I handled that all by myself. I in 2018, I think I said I wrote about something like 140 games or something. Like it was nuts. This year, obviously, for Sage, I demanded I have help. And that ended up being its own, unique thing where, wrangling people, trying to figure out who's reviewing what. People, were protesting that even splitting, what was it, 83, 84 games this year, splitting that 3 ways was too much for some people. We might change format next year because there's just so many games at Sage to talk about these days. That it's getting a little difficult to highlight every single one. It's one of those things where if I could provide feedback to every single individual game, all 80-some games, almost 90 games, I would. But that's not realistically humanly possible after what happened to me in 2018. So, next year we might change Sage formats at TSSE News. We might not. I don't know. That's for next year to worry about. Right now, it's just, we had trouble getting it all set up. I think it came out to something like 28 games each between the 3 of us. And one of us did our games as live streams, which, I personally don't prefer. And it seemed to cause a little bit of confusion among some of our reader base. That's a bummer. But at the same time, the entire reason why I handled all 87 games by myself last year is because right around the same time as the Sonic Amateur Games Expo is Comic-Con, and we send people to cover Comic-Con from the show floor. So that's also like Lewis doing all his Sage reviews as a live stream was a necessity for him in the preparation for going to Comic-Con this year. So, I may not have liked it, but also that's just the reality of the situation. I don't think anything could have been done about that. He just didn't have time to sit there for 2 or 3 days, writing out all these Sage reviews. The articles get published every other day or like every 2 days, but it probably would have taken him a lot longer to write his articles. So he just, buzzed through them real quick as live streams. Those live streams did go up on the website. And then Noah and I, we handled our Sage reviews as text, as, the usual. After that, I got assigned a Monkey Ball Banana Blitz HD review, which I can't talk about until October 19th, October 29th, it says here in my notes. I actually got confused about when this embargo date is over. I originally thought it was the 24th, so my review is like all written, ready to go. I just have to post it on the website. And it's a good thing that I checked the embargo email, because it said, I think preview coverage and like preview footage could get uploaded by like October 14th, October 11th. And then the review embargo is the 29th. So it would have been a problem if I posted it a week early. But, that's something that happened. I'm also still technically writing the Judgment review. To be perfectly honest with you, I haven't touched that game since Sage. It's, I've talked about being intimidated by Yakuza. It's one of those things where it sounds fine in my head and then it comes out of my mouth. And I think that's not how Yakuza is said. I always try and put some weird inflection on it or whatever. Anyway, I've talked about how the Yakuza games are very intimidating to me because they're very large, very dense games. This is technically my first Yakuza game, even though it's a Yakuza spin-off. So, I've been too busy for Judgment. I made time for Monkey Ball because it's a light, breezy game, It's very, like, arcade style. It's easy to write a review about, I cranked through that. At some point here, though, I'm gonna have to sit down, play Judgment for, like, a whole day, and then just get my review out, whether I finish the game or not. Just to get that monkey off my back and get the review done. I mean, I don't think it's a secret to say that it's probably a pretty good game. I don't know how it ends, But I've heard other people's opinions about it. I know how I feel on it from I don't know, I put like 9 or 10 hours into it already. And that was just the first chapter. But yeah, that's whew. After that, my plan was I mentioned this, I think probably in the previous podcast, maybe even as far back as July. I wanted to get a Shenmue video out. Shenmue 3 is in a few weeks now. There's been preview events. There's a like a Kickstarter backer demo out there now. I have things I want to say about Shenmue. And the plan was that, I'd breeze through Dare to Scare because I figured those videos were super easy to edit. They are, but they aren't. And, after I got all my Dare to Scare stuff done, I would, play through Shenmue 1 and 2. Those are long games, but, you don't need footage of the entire games to do a video about them. So it was kind of going to be like, when I did my Shenmue video all the way back in 2009, let's say, I think that's when that was, where it's just like, the first 3 hours of each game. That's probably not going to happen. I don't think I have time to get all that out before Shenmue 3 releases. I think I might just sit on that script until after Shenmue 3 is out and then evaluate where to go from there. Chances are everything I have to say in that video probably will still hold for Shenmue 3, and then I will write like a separate Shenmue 3 review, separate from this video script. Because this video script, it's not a video review. It's more editorializing. It's more game crit, as it were. It is very much a different sort of thing. But that script is almost done. I've been watching a friend, Imran Khan, formerly of Game Informer. I've been watching him stream Shenmue 2, and it's kind of been keeping me on task with getting that script cleaned up, honed down, focused in to where it actually says what I want it to say about the Shenmue series. So that's almost done. That's not quite there yet. Let's see what else. At the same time as all of this, I was trying to get the ball rolling on my Sonic 3 video. The whole entire reason that I was trying to do a Shenmue video, Christmas, holiday revenue season is coming for YouTube channels. If you don't know what this is, I think I might have explained this last year or some other time. Right around Christmas, right around the holidays, Black Friday, YouTube ad revenue like doubles, basically. If you have a really good video that's going to get a lot of views, you kind of want to drop it late October, early November, so that you can ride this monetization all the way through December and up to January, because that is big buck season, as it were. I wanted the Shenmue video because I figured that would do really well from an editorial and viewpoint standpoint, but that's probably not going to happen. So in the interim, I've mentioned for months now wanting to do a video called The Definitive Way to Play Sonic 3, because I know that's going to be a very popular video. So when it looked like, Shenmue was starting to flag, fall behind a little bit, I decided to spin up and actually get the Sonic 3 video done. So that's what I've been doing since then. I gave the script another once over. I built a shot list. I built a list of resources I need to get this video done, which is, video that needs to be captured, images I need to find on the internet, things like that, music, just resources to put the video together with. I'm most of the way through my capture requirements. I've captured almost all the game footage that I need, even though, like last night, I actually went back through the shot list, and I found a bunch of stuff that I missed the first time through when I built my resource list. So I do actually still have probably about a quarter of that list left to capture. Most of it is like live action camera stuff of, like I shoot footage of my Android tablet because there are Sonic games on the Android tablet and I talk about it and I want to show that. It's things like that. And then I have like, I need to find a bunch of promotional photos of certain things, box arts, headshots for certain people that are mentioned in the video. It's just a process, but that's been my whole like 2 weeks at this point, was just getting all that footage captured, getting all these images together, building the shot list, all this stuff. But that's nearing completion. Hopefully that'll be done sometime in early November. I don't think it's going to be done before Halloween, but who knows? The rate at which I work is variable. And something else I've been trying to do, actually I say that when it looked like the Shenmue video was falling behind, I spun up on this Sonic 3 video. That's kind of a little white lie. Something I realized, I watched a video a long, long time ago, about how to build a reliable schedule for releasing YouTube videos. And I've complained about in the past, wondering how people keep putting out more videos than I do, even though I feel like I'm trying to find ways to put videos out faster, like I never seem to be fast enough. I ended up finding a video about this one guy describing his work process. And he said, like, the key to consistent content, getting things out reliably, like every week, every 2 weeks, things like that, is to be working on multiple projects at the same time. So, like, his whole thing was that if you have, I think, like, to back up a little bit, his thing was that you write 3 scripts, record the narration for those 3 scripts, and then edit the 3 videos, do all of that simultaneously. Don't do it one at a time, like don't write a script, record audio, and then edit the video, and then move on to the next video. Write 3 scripts all at the same time, record 3 audio all at the same time, edit 3 videos all at the same time. So that, when one video is done, the next video is almost done, and then that video comes out, and the next one is almost done. And you keep this up, sort of replacing old projects, completed projects, with unfinished projects. So, you have 3 videos that you're working on at the same time. One of them comes out, you start writing the script for the next video. So you have 2 videos that are almost done, 1 video that you've just started. And you kind of continue this cycle over and over. And that's how you stay consistent. Truth be told, I was kind of trying to do the Shenmue video and the Sonic 3 video at the same time. But obviously, now that I've realized Shenmue's probably not happening, I have kind of started pushing that more towards the back burner, while I've been pushing Sonic 3 more towards the front of my attention. And that's why the Sonic 3 video is kind of pulling ahead of the Shenmue video in terms of having all this footage captured, having the shot list, having the audio, because the script on the Shenmue video isn't done yet. It's almost done. It's at a point now where you can read the whole script start to finish, and it feels like a complete thought. But there are things that I need to go back and change because my opinions, again, I've been watching my friend Imran stream Shenmue 2. I need to go back. My opinions have changed on specifically Shenmue 2, and I need to tweak some certain things to match what I'm actually trying to communicate about that game. So, this is the whole big confusion of the last 2 months of my life, is trying to juggle those 2 videos, reviewing 28 Sage games, the Monkey Ball HD review, always having judgment in the back of my mind. It has been a time. Oh, and also editing Dare to Scare videos down as well. And, of course, in the middle of all this, we also finally had to put the cat down. I think it was her time, We knew this ever since we took her into the vet in July. She wasn't doing well. She was getting worse. We got advice from the vet, give her special food. We gave her special food. And there just came a point where she stopped eating. And she was very clearly in pain. I don't want to go into too many details because it's very sad. But there was just a time where she was old enough. She was at least 10 years old, probably older than that. And we didn't want her to suffer anymore. So we put her down. And that has been, on top of all this other stuff, just a very weird experience. Because, I wrote in a Tumblr blog not too long ago, I've never been alone. I've always had pets for my entire life. As long as I can remember, we've had pets. Poodles and peekapoos, and we had 4 cats living with us at some points. We've always had pets. And this is literally the first time in 36 years, because that's how old I am, that I've never had a pet around, and it is a weird experience. And there's one more thing on top of all this other stuff that I'm not going to talk about yet, but hopefully I'll be able to mention soon. But that's what's been going on since the last podcast. What was it? It was like September 8th? September 10th? I don't even remember. It was a long time ago. Anyway, I say September, I think 10th, maybe 11th, because the last time I edited this podcast's notes document was September 12th. And in there, I ended up writing some extended thoughts from that Crash Team Racing review. I guess it technically is a review. It's that comparison video I did between Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled and Team Sonic Racing that released on September 1st. I had some extended thoughts I wanted to talk about all the way back in that, belated August podcast that I forgot to talk about it. So I ended up writing it all out here in my notes. So I guess we'll just go through that now. The thing with that video is, gosh, I don't even know how to interpret these notes anymore because they were written so long ago. Like, I don't even remember the headspace I was in when I wrote some of this stuff. I apparently wanted to start out talking about the viewership for that video, which actually, it seemed really popular at first. I think there was a lot of like, how dare you views coming in, which is not something that I usually like to rely on when it comes to videos I do on my channel. I'm not like a big outrage gamer or anything like that. You like what you like, I like what I like, and I try and live and let live, so to speak. And it was kind of a bummer that, maybe I had like this big rush of views at first, but those fell off like really hard. I think within those first 2 days, I had something like 1,700 views, and then it kind of just hung at 1,700 views. And it might not even have passed 2,000 views by the time this podcast goes up. And, we're talking almost 2 months later. So it has really, fell off a cliff, so to speak. There was a lot of, understandable negative reaction to that video, which, again, I kind of predicted. I'm very much live and let live. This is one of the few times where I feel like I actually came out swinging, and I knew that people really liked Crash Team Racing, and I figured, especially that legacy of Crash Team Racing, right? It was the PlayStation 1's competitor to Mario Kart. And it still, to this day, is kind of held up as this shining example of, oh, well, if you don't want to play Mario Kart, but you like kart racers, there's always Diddy Kong Racing, and there's always Crash Team Racing on the PlayStation 1. Those are kind of the two shining examples. That and Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, that's another good one. But beyond that, the waters start to get a little bit muddy. I'm also partial to the Bizarre Creations game Blur. I think that's a great kart racer too. But I knew that if I was going to take Crash Team Racing to task, then people were going to be upset and they were going to disagree with me. And that's perfectly fine. It's okay if you don't agree with me. That's what I'm trying to say. The point, the thing that I was trying to get across in the video, and I'm not really sure if I communicated it properly, I really cannot stress that it is the most difficult kart racer I've ever played. Not the most frustrating, the most frustrating kart racer I've ever played too. It just feels like I'm missing something, and that's because I am. There was a very intentional move made by the developers to add lots of quote-unquote depth to the game, with the Blue Fire boost system and things like that, but it never communicates any of that to the average player. It's one of those things where you kind of have to look up YouTube guides to understand how it works, because it's not obvious. If you just play the game by yourself, you'll never know how this Blue Fire boost system works. You'll never understand how people chain boosts all throughout a stage and maintain this super boost state. And that's what is mostly frustrating to me, is that it's way back in Mario Kart DS, there was this thing called snaking, right? Where you would, because you get like boosts in Mario Kart DS for going into like a drift and then kind of wiggling back and forth to build up like a bigger boost. So you could, even on straightaways, go into a drift to the right, build up a boost, fire off the boost. That would then send you into a drift to the left where you'd build up a boost, fire off that boost, and you'd kind of like chain these drift boosts all the way through a stage. And it was like a very advanced technique. It was very difficult to pull off for like the average player or whatever, and I hated it. I could drift. I had friends make fun of me for supposedly snaking in Mario Kart DS, but I didn't like it because it put like a wedge, an unnecessary wedge between highly skilled players and just like average skill players. An average skill player would never be able to catch anyone that was snaking, and that's not fair to me. It shouldn't be this thing where you have to learn this extremely high level technique just to have fun at a game. And you could argue that, well, if Crash Team Racing, what am I even trying to say here? What do my notes say? There's an idea I'm trying to grasp, and it's got cobwebs all around it, and I can't remember. The skill ceiling is so astronomically high with all of the advanced mechanics that they added to the game, is basically what I'm trying to say. You end up in scenarios where you go online and first place starts lapping people because, like, half the people in any given match are treating it like a normal kart racer. Meanwhile, the guy in first place is chaining together all these blue fire boosts, and he's just, he's 2 laps ahead of everyone else. And that's not competitive, that's not fun, that's not fair. Not everybody wants to race like that. And that, like, you'd think, okay, well, just don't go online, don't play multiplayer, just play it by yourself. And even then, I feel like the game is specifically built with this high skill ceiling in mind. I complained about how hard even normal difficulty was. I can't even imagine how hard difficulty was. Because it expects so much out of you. And I have put so much into the kart racing genre that it feels like I should be better at this game than I actually am. And it's not fun learning these mechanics to get up to that high skill level. And that's a bummer for me. It's kind of like years and years ago when the Sonic Generations Sonic Unleashed, the Unleashed Project mod came out. There was a problem I had with it where they made like all the S ranks in that mod super, super difficult, and it pissed me off because I was good at Sonic Unleashed. I could get S ranks in that game, and it took many, 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 many hours of practice over and over and over and over again to get S ranks in some of these stages. And then the mod version of Sonic Unleashed comes out for Sonic Generations, and suddenly they're like 10 times harder and I can't get S ranks anymore. It's this thing where, like, I feel like I'm good at the game, and they're telling me, no, you have to be a psychopath to be good at this game. And that pissed me off. That's sort of, but not quite what it feels like with Crash Team Racing. I'm good at kart racers. I win consistently. There's no way to say that without sounding like a jerk. I realize that. But it's such a weird thing. It's like the game is asking you to play at the level of like an NBA pro against like a group of kindergartners, basically. And they're being thrown into the same game together. And it just doesn't feel like that's fair. It doesn't feel like that's balanced. It just feels like a mess. And that was at the heart of what I feel is like a major misfire in that game, is just this kind of weird, unbalanced difficulty curve that doesn't make sense to me. It's not really catering to anyone that it needs to cater to. It's that sort of like, it's almost like a worse version of that Guitar Hero problem, right? Where everyone starts out Guitar Hero on easy mode, and then you get really, really good at easy mode to where it becomes almost boring to play anymore. So you bump it up to normal, and then all of a sudden, it's like the hardest thing in the world, because they add one extra button. And some people, they figure out how to deal with that extra button, and some people don't. And that's kind of like the first brick wall of Guitar Hero. And that's in Crash Team Racing, but like multiplied 1,000, where easy feels so like brain dead easy, like it's for little children. And, fair enough. If you're a little child and you like easy mode, more power to you. That's kind of why it's there. But to go from easy mode to normal mode is this astronomical jump in difficulty that I could never get my head around. And it's because it's all predicated on these systems, these high-level skill ceiling systems that just aren't fun for me to interact with. And that sucks. And it like extra sucks because it's hard for me to ignore the fact that Crash Team Racing is more popular than Team Sonic Racing. And the whole point of that video was, Crash Team Racing versus Team Sonic Racing. Crash Team Racing has gotten way more support. All of their season pass stuff is to push people to play together online. So it has this thriving multiplayer community. They're constantly adding new content to the game every month. There's a brand new Halloween track this month. There's like 2 or 3 new racers. All these skins, all the just bunch of crap is getting added to that game every single month. They have, plans now up through December, and I suppose after December finishes out, that's probably going to be the end of Crash Team Racing. But, it's way more post-launch support than Team Sonic Racing got. And that's kind of a problem with Sumo Digital's Sonic Racing games in general. I think it's a problem to do with Sega. Sega doesn't really pay very much money for post-game support. So, DLC after the fact kind of gets swept under the rug. Team Sonic Racing had kind of a troubled development anyway, so it seems like even patching the game post-release is kind of getting swept under the rug. So even though I have more fun playing Team Sonic Racing, I have way less incentive to keep playing Team Sonic Racing. Because, even though if I hate it, Crash Team Racing is getting new stuff all the time. And it kind of draws me towards it, where that sucks. Because I don't want to do that. I don't want to play Crash Team Racing, but I still do. Like once a month. And then I go, oh, right, this is Crash Team Racing. This sucks. And then, of course, on top of that was all the microtransaction stuff, buying Wumpa coins and all their, double EXP weekends. And But the sad part is that stuff works. That stuff is a proven system to keep people engaged with the product, as it were. But I do think it's starting to wear off. I have a friend that was paying attention to leaderboard numbers. I think the very first season for Crash Team Racing, there were over 1 million people registered on the leaderboard. And I think as of not the Halloween season, but the season before that, the Spyro the Dragon season, I think it's down to something like 180,000 players are still registering for the leaderboard. So, things are dropping fast. That's why I say I don't think there's going to be much more DLC, many more seasons past December. Once they get their Christmas content out, that's probably going to be it. I assume by the time their Christmas content is out, there's probably only going to be like 25,000 people on the leaderboard. Actually, I could check right now, but I'd have to close YouTube on my PS4, and I don't want to lose my place in this video. But yeah, Crash Team Racing has lost probably a good 80% of its player base, and it's only going to go down from here. So, that some of that is just the natural progression of a multiplayer game. People get what they want out of it, and then they drop it. And, even 25,000 players, an active player base of 25,000 people is still a lot, right? If you look at the charts for the most played multiplayer games on Steam right now, there are a lot of games that you would think are very popular that are under 10,000 active concurrent players. So, that's just the way things go, apparently. But yeah, that's hopefully what I wanted to say about Crash Team Racing. It was a little bit scattershot because, again, I wrote all of these 6 weeks ago, all of the notes about what I wanted to talk about. One thing I wrote in here that I actually forgot to say, depth is not automatically a substitute for quality. That's actually a really interesting point here in my notes that I kind of glossed over. What that basically means is that, to go back to this whole difficulty skill ceiling thing, having all the depth in the world is meaningless if 90% of your player base doesn't either know how to interface with it or doesn't want to interface with it. And, it's one of those things where I keep talking about Mario Kart DS and knowing how to snake, doing that drift boost thing. I could go on YouTube and learn how to do the blue fire boost stuff in Crash Team Racing, but I don't want to be that kind of jerk. And I wonder how many other people are in a very similar situation to that. They like kart racers, but they don't want to take them that seriously. And it's just a very weird thing that made me not like that game. And the other thing, I know I said I was done with this topic. The other thing that really pisses me off about Crash Team Racing is the weapon balance in that game. It wouldn't be so bad if any of the weapons were effective at all. It feels like everything in that game is centered around balance being to attack the person directly in front of you. If they're more than a turn ahead of you, then they may as well not even exist. Missiles are useless. They have a blue shell equivalent that goes through and, messes everyone else up in the race until it gets to first place. If you have a person doing blue fire boosts in a race, that blue shell item never catches them because they're going too fast. Things like TNT crates are astoundingly easy to avoid. So are the green vials of slime. None of the weapons in that game are effective. The rolling bombs, those are worthless too. It's just a nightmare to me to play that game. It was perfectly fine on the PlayStation 1 as a single-player game where you didn't have to think too hard about it, when it was just a fun game where you did jump boosts around wacky tracks. And now that they've kind of put it into this more competitive setting with smarter artificial intelligence and real human players, it just becomes a disaster. But I've said enough about Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. That's the end of this segment. After the break, we'll come back with Patreon emails from patrons. After I complained the other month, we actually got 3 emails. So we'll be back after the break to talk about that. See you then. Free your soul. And we are back with Patreon donor messages. If you would like to hear your message read out here on the podcast, and if you are not a Patreon donor, just go to patreon.com/blazehedgehog and pledge, I think it is $1 or more a month. If you are a Patreon donor, simply send in a message to and I will read your message here on the podcast. It can be a question. It can be just about anything as long as it's not offensive. First message is a question from Gabe M. It says, "Hey Ryan, do you have any particular game designer whose design philosophy you subscribe to? For me, it's Mike Stout. As a person who grew up on character action games and platformers, hearing his Ratchet & Clank developer commentary really blew my mind. It was like finding out Santa wasn't real but with video games, and these days I do my best to follow his design ethos these days." Did I read that right? No, yeah, you just said these days twice. Man, I do stuff like that all the time. I was curious if you had... I forgot to mention, top of this... I stopped my recording at 3 p.m. It is now 1 a.m., so it's been quite a break. It's actually kind of nearing my bedtime here. Anyway, I was curious if you yourself had somebody like that who you try to emulate. Had to add some spice to the podcast at the same time with this question. Thanks for reading. Well, thanks, Gabe M. I'm not so sure that I single a specific person out. I was chewing on this question for most of my break, actually, ever since putting it into the podcast show notes here, or whatever you want to call this thing on my tablet. Like, there's no specific person I think I subscribe to. It's just kind of like this goulash of everything I hear from everyone I respect. So, like, I think like highly of Valve and their color theory, specifically. Like, they gave like a talk at GDC many years ago. I was going to say a few years ago, but this was back when it first launched, about TF2. That's kind of been like the whole linchpin, I think, of with character readability, let's say. They applied that not only to Team Fortress 2, but they applied that to Left 4 Dead as well. It's kind of about having specific colors to break up the arms from the shoulders, break up the hands from the wrists and stuff like that, with like vests and different colored shirts and gloves. Obviously, I think about like Shigeru Miyamoto, the things he talks about, the rule of threes, that very basic design ethos, whatever. Just, stuff like that. I don't think I really think of one person that I try to emulate. It's kind of like an art style in a sense, right? I don't know if like you can sort of understand this. Well, that sounds kind of rude for me to say, come to think of it. But there's like this concept with doing art, like drawing pictures, painting paintings and things like that, about inspiration, right? Everybody takes inspiration from somebody. You have artists that you really like, and usually you think, okay, I like the way this person draws their eyes. I want to draw eyes like that. I like the way this person draws hips. I want to draw hips like that. I like the way this person positions feet or arms, or the way they render hair. And you kind of take bits and pieces of all these different art styles, and that is how your own personal art style comes out. It's this kind of combination of everything you see from everyone. And I'd like to think, that's kind of how I view game design, basically. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what you're doing, really. I mean, deep dives into a singular person like that can also be very valuable and very, like, an important learning experience. So, like, don't feel shame or anything like that just because you focus on this Mike Stout guy. I mean, I'm sure he's very intelligent. So, it's just different strokes for different folks, I guess. I do feel like I probably lean closer to Valve, though. I was, not so much these days for obvious reasons, but I was a really huge Valve fanboy for quite a while. Half-Life, Half-Life 2, Team Fortress 2, Left 4 Dead. Oh my gosh. I put like 940 hours into Left 4 Dead 2. It's probably one of my most played games of all time at this point. I do think that when they would talk about their design process, I would definitely listen to them, probably more than most, I'd say. The other two messages, both from my cousin Matt, if you remember, I was going to say last month, but the quote-unquote August podcast that was actually posted in September, he sent in a dinosaur fact. Well, we have two brand new dinosaur facts from him today. Was the last one a dinosaur fact, or was it just like something about dinosaurs with feathers that made me be an old man? His dinosaur facts this time, though. Some of the biggest plant eaters had to eat as much as a ton of food a day. This is similar to eating a bus-sized pile of vegetation every day. That's a lot of food. I was going to say, I think like maybe elephants come close to that, but I don't think that's true. Giraffes might come close to that, because I think it's something to do with like their metabolism and their long necks and stuff like that. And like their really long legs, the way blood travels and things like that. That probably applies to herbivoric dinosaurs as well, the long neck guys like Brachiosaurus, Apatosaurus, etc., etc. They probably also needed to eat large quantities of food for somewhat similar reasons, but also they were very, very large dinosaurs. Oh, what I'm thinking of actually is like the blue whale or the sperm whale, they eat like a ton of plankton a day. And you think about the size of a plankton. I mean, you think SpongeBob SquarePants, right? How big is plankton in that cartoon? And they eat a ton of those guys every day. They filter them through their teeth. That's crazy. Second dinosaur fact, Colorado's nickname is the Stegosaurus state. The first ever Stegosaurus skeleton was found near Morrison, Colorado. Also near Morrison, Colorado, at Dinosaur Ridge, you can see natural fossils of dinosaur footprints and plants in the mountainside. Fun fact, I've actually been to Dinosaur Ridge. It was probably somewhere around the 6th grade. We had what I think is probably a field trip up there. I'm not actually like 110% sure that it was Dinosaur Ridge, but hearing him say dinosaur footprints and plants in the mountainside, I do very distinctly remember that. Basically, the bus driver drove a bus all the way up into the mountains. It was scary as crap, because, you're very high up and they are very narrow roads, not really big enough for 2 cars to fit on, basically. And you had this bus driver, and we were going up, very steep inclines. You can see, it's just a cliffside next to the bus, basically. It was incredibly intense, very nerve-wracking. He was going very slow, which, actually heightened the tension a lot, because it's like, why is this bus driver going so slowly? And then once we found a place to park, we actually had to hike up even further up into the mountains to get to the location. And I remember almost feeling like I was going to pass out, because it was actually a very rigorous hike, and I was very out of shape back then. Probably dangerously out of shape. It's kind of a long story. I had weird health issues back then. Let's not get into it now. But yeah, I remember at one point feeling like I was going to pass out, because the teacher wouldn't slow down. You were kind of expected to stay with the rest of the kids. I was just pouring sweat. It was a bad scene. But we ended up getting to our location, and it was like this almost rock wall. It wasn't quite a wall. It wasn't, perfectly vertical or whatever. It was kind of like this shelf or whatever. But it was like this smooth sort of sandstone almost. I don't know if it was sandstone. Probably wasn't sandstone, but it was this kind of smooth outcropping of rock. And there were dinosaur footprints in what was mud. And I think some kids got to take home fossils. Maybe I got to take home a fossil and I just lost it. I'm not entirely sure. But I do remember we had to do an assignment up there or whatever. It was a very long time ago. I don't remember all the details. But I do remember seeing the dinosaur footprints in the side of the mountain, and that is an experience that will probably stick with me for the rest of my life, for as long as I can remember it as clearly as I do, which is to say, not especially clearly, but clear enough that I know that I was there and I have a vague idea of what it looked like. They weren't huge dinosaur prints or anything like that. It was probably, I was going to say about the size of a horse, but that's not true. Horseshoe prints are very small. Probably we'll say the size of a bear print, a bear claw. Not the foodstuff bear claw, but a bear claw, a claw of a bear. It was wild. Kind of wish I could have gone back up there again. For the longest time, I actually thought that was in Boulder somewhere. And I really don't think that was the case. 6th grade was how many years ago for me now? It was 20 years ago. No, it wasn't 20 years ago. I'm 36. No, that would have been I was 16? So I was probably 13 or 14 when that happened. So it probably was I don't know, 22 years ago. Whew, I'm getting old. But yeah, that was Patreon messages. Once again, if you are not a Patreon donor, but you want to hear your message on the podcast, just go to patreon.com/blazehedgehog, pledge $1 or more a month, and then you can send an email to...
It can't get any worse than this, can it?
That is an email address that only Patreon donors can hear. if you are a freebie listening on YouTube, you probably heard a very hilarious voice clip, or maybe one of these days I'll just leave it totally silent, because honestly, I'm starting to run out of like weird sounds to put over that. Like, you wouldn't think so, but saying that email address out loud actually takes like a second or two, and finding a clip that is just long enough to cover up me reading out the podcast email is a challenge. But that's that. We'll take another break here, and then we'll come back with the final segment about media and games I have been playing and watching and seeing and doing. So we'll see you then. I'll see you then. There is no we here. And now we're on to our final segment where I talk about media I've been ingesting. Usually that's like, games I've been playing, movies I've been seeing, TV I've been watching, just things I've been enjoying lately, be it whatever, entertainment as a whole. The bad news is that, like, since I've been so busy, I haven't really been playing very many games for fun lately. It's all basically been for work. Like I said earlier, I'm playing Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz HD. I can't really talk about that because the review embargo isn't up until October 29th. And as of my clock right now, it is October 26th. So there's still at least 3 days left. And if I'm going to be talking about that game now, because there is like a preview embargo for that game that I think lifted on either October 11th or October 14th, somewhere around there, where I can like post footage of the game, I can talk about the game, but I'm not allowed to give, like final review thoughts. And earlier I said that my review is basically done at this point. So if I'm going to be giving thoughts about this game, they are going to be final review thoughts. So I probably should just keep my mouth shut. I will say this, I'm not like a super big Monkey Ball fan. Not to say that I'm unfamiliar with the Monkey Ball franchise or that I hate the Monkey Ball franchise or anything like that. It's just I've never really played a ton of them. I've played probably the most, and I write this in my review, spoilers for that. This isn't really Banana Blitz opinions, so I think it's probably safe for me to say this, but the most Monkey Ball I've played is probably Monkey Ball Jr. on the Game Boy Advance, which is actually like a fairly competent port of, I think, Super Monkey Ball 2. You wouldn't really think so, but the Game Boy Advance actually like handles that super simple 3D really, really well. And outside of not having an analog stick on the Game Boy Advance, it actually like plays very well. So I've probably put, a few hours into that. It's the game I kind of pick up every now and then because I have like portable systems on me and whatever. There's no version of Super Monkey Ball 2 or whatever on my Android tablet on anything else. So usually, Monkey Ball Jr. is the version I end up playing. I have put a little bit of time into Super Monkey Ball 2 proper, in an emulator, I'll say that. It's fine, but it's not a game I seek out very often. It's just okay. So, maybe my review won't be from a very informed perspective, but I think I still say some decent things in there. I can form opinions on games that I've never really played before. That's kind of like the whole business, right? Though I'm starting to wonder, like, at TSSC News, I thought we had, I was the reviews editor, and then we had someone else. We had Lewis, who was also doing reviews, and he hasn't done a review in a while, and I'm starting to wonder why that is. I'm starting to feel a little guilty, like I'm stealing the spotlight from him or something. I don't know. There's probably just like, a staff email or something I wasn't paying attention to. That tends to happen a lot. Like, not to pull back the curtain or give you too much inside baseball here, but getting people to read and respond to staff emails is difficult. I mean, I think that's probably true even of like very big, very expensive, very famous news organizations, right? That's just kind of how it goes. It's weird. I don't mind reviewing every game that comes through TSSC News. I'm very happy and thankful for the work. It's, work I get paid to do, so I'm glad to do it. It's just, I'm feeling a little self-conscious and a little guilty, like maybe I'm doing something wrong. But as long as the codes keep coming to me, maybe that's just how it goes. I No, I won't say that. That is probably a little too inside baseball, so I will keep that to myself. I've been so busy over the last month and a half, 2 months, that I didn't even play anything. I didn't play everything from Sage this year. Earlier I said, we split review duties up 3 ways between me, Noah, and Lewis. I played my 28 games, and that's kind of all I played. I did play a few games here and there outside of my wheelhouse. Games like Vertebreaker and things like that. Vertebreaker's okay. I mean, I don't know. If you don't know what Vertebreaker is, essentially, Stealth, Simon Tomley, broke off from the Sonic Mania development team shortly after Sonic Mania was completed, and now he is working with other people on Vertebreaker. It's kind of his debut game for the headcanon engine, or whatever he's calling it nowadays. It was EO2 way back in the day. Maybe that's like a separate engine. I'm not sure. Anyway, point is, he is working with people he knows to make Vertebreaker, which originally I think started out as a tech demo for his pitch to Disney to kind of remaster the Darkwing Duck NES game. There's a video of it out there somewhere. And obviously, he put the video up of his pitch to Disney saying that Disney rejected him. So I think out of that project came Vertebreaker, which kind of expands on the grappling hook ideas he was working with in that Darkwing Duck game. Problem is, I think the controls in Vertebreaker are a little too complex for my tastes. It's been a while since I've played Vertebreaker, but as I seem to recall, you can control that grappling hook with like 4 or 5 different buttons, to hook, to pull on it, to extend the rope, to shorten the rope. There's a lot of buttons that feel like it's a little overcomplicated for me, but, that's just my opinion. It is still obviously very early. There is exactly 1 level in the demo he put out for Sage, so, I'm sure things will get ironed out in the future. I hope they get ironed out in the future. Early testing like this is very valuable for, figuring out what works and what doesn't, getting eyeballs on your game, as it were. The sprites are lovely, though. It's got a very PlayStation 1 sort, well, not even, it's like it's sort of that Sonic Mania thing where it's like a Sega Saturn game, right? A very nice looking Sega Saturn game. Just these beautiful 2D sprites, they're kind of high resolution, very high color depth, lots of character and personality. It's very good. I like it. I wish it played a little bit better, but, again, it's early. Probably shouldn't be too harsh on it. If you want some recommendations for other Sage games to play, I think the website is actually still up, so if you hit up sageexpo.org, I would recommend checking out XF Drive Adventure, which is a game I put up a YouTube video for on my channel. It's a game by Lake Feppard, the Spark the Electric Jester, Sonic before the sequel, Sonic after the sequel. That's that guy. He's actually been working on XF Drive Adventure for quite a long time. There were alphas years and years and years ago under the name of like XF Racing, and then it became XF Racing Institute. It's been a very evolving project over the years. I think it actually predates Spark the Electric Jester coming out on Steam even. It certainly predates Spark the Electric Jester 2. which XF Drive Adventure kind of recycles a bunch of assets and music from. But it is a very fun, very arcadey racing game. Um, I don't. I'd say it kind of reminds me of a combination of like Outrun, Trackmania, and like a Sonic the Hedgehog game. Obviously, level track design is very, very, very like Sonic the Hedgehog to me. A lot of people tell me that I'm crazy, but I think like those are people that don't really pay super close attention to the flow of a Sonic the Hedgehog level. Um, or just, straight up don't play Sonic the Hedgehog games in 3D. But obviously, XF Drive Adventure is very influenced by Spark the Electric Jester 2. It's very influenced by Sonic the Hedgehog, and that's why I love it. It's got this very, like, chunky, meaty drift system. It's got, like, boost pads. It's got that kind of, anti-gravity gameplay with loops and corkscrews. It is just very, 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 very fun. I love it to pieces. The only thing that I don't like is that Lake has said that is not his next major project. If it was up to me, I would have him do a whole game of that, Obviously, some parts of it do still need to be refined a little bit. The demo ends with kind of a boss battle that's a little awkward and slow. That obviously needs, a little bit more something to make it interesting. So, if he has other projects on the back burner, I'm not really going to like begrudge him that. I just hope that, XF Drive Adventure comes out at some point. It's not just eternal demos forever, because I really like that game. I think it feels super good to play. I love the music. I mean, it's just Spark the Electric Jester music, which was good anyway, but it's just when all put together into that one game, into a driving game specifically, a driving game that is that fast, controls that well, looks just absolutely gorgeous. It's got like kind of that sort of like neo retro aesthetic where like, all the textures are kind of almost pixel art, and it's got kind of like a fake low resolution on it. It's got kind of a fake color depth applied to it. It's almost kind of got like a cell shading look to it. It just looks really striking. It sounds incredible. It plays incredible. I love this game. I'd also recommend you check out Sonic Smackdown. This one has been getting a lot of buzz recently. I know like Wooly from Wooly Versus. I almost said Super Best Friends, but they aren't around anymore. But Wooly Madden from Wooly Versus, he did a video on this, which is like surprising to me. Like you don't think people like that pay attention to that sort of game or like the Sonic fan community. And here he is doing like a breakdown video where it's him and his friends just kind of goofing around in the game. It plays super well. It's kind of like a Marvel vs. Capcom sort of fighting game. It's not built in Mugen or anything like that. It's completely original. It's in Unreal Engine 4. It's kind of got like a Dragon Ball Fighter Z art style to it almost. It plays really, really well. It's not like, super flashy or anything like that. You can tell it's kind of like a 1 or 2 or 3 man team working on this game, but it plays well where it counts and it looks good. It's definitely worth looking into, though you kind of have to have friends to play it with. I don't think you can fight against CPU players just yet. So that's something to keep in mind. I'd also give a look at Petrichor. Petrichor? I think it's Petrichor. I don't know. Maybe it's French. Petrichor. 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 Anyway, it's like a 2D indie horror game about kind of being stranded on an alien planet, like a hostile alien planet. It's got kind of like a Dark Souls vibe to it, yes. It's just got that kind of somber, quiet feeling to it sometimes. You come across dead bodies and stuff like that, and there's this very like sense of like, I don't know, it's that Dark Souls vibe, where it's kind of depressing and maybe a little bit quiet and a little bit unsettling. That's kind of the vibe I get from it, even though, it's aliens on a hostile planet, right? It's kind of got that Metroid vibe to it. And you're not walking around and shooting. You've kind of got this jetpack, and you're hovering around levels. It's very unique in that sense. I definitely give it a look if you haven't. And finally, I guess like Sondro Gomez, which is an NES style old-fashioned game, kind of patterned after a classic Castlevania. If you paid any attention to Sage last year, there was a demo for a game called Kyle and Lucy. It's kind of by some like Sonic Fan Games HQ old bees. Kind of like their own sort of take on Freedom Planet and Spark the Electric Jester, where they're taking these Sonic game concepts and kind of spinning them out into their own original IP with original characters and an original world and whatever. Sondro Gomez is kind of a part of that, I guess. It's not like super duper clear, but they were talking about it being kind of like almost this shared universe, and maybe like I almost get the sense that Sondro Gomez will be like a mini game within Kyle and Lucy. Or Kyle and Lucy will meet Sondro Gomez in their game, something like that anyway. But the point is, the actual Sondro Gomez game itself, it's just a fun, old school, classic NES action game. Again, I said it was patterned after Castlevania, and that's very much true. But what really impressed me about this game is kind of like its dedication to replicating the limitations of the NES. Not specifically like sprite limits or processing limits or anything like that, but with the way the NES would render graphics, right? You'd have background layers, you'd have sprite layers, and there was like very specific rules in which those layers operated. And that's kind of what Sondro Gomez replicates like very, very faithfully. It has kind of very faithful layering errors. It has very faithful, like, let's say you walk over a bridge that crumbles beneath your feet. Because that was a background layer, it kind of leaves these blank squares behind where the tiles fell, which is like a very 8-bit NES sort of thing to do. And obviously this isn't a real 8-bit game. I think it's made in either like Game Maker or Click Team Fusion or something like that. So they are faking it, but they are putting like a very fine attention to detail into this faking process. And it is very impressive to me. And it also just plays really well, It plays like the best NES Castlevania. That's not to say that, like, obviously, I'd say the best NES Castlevania is Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. It doesn't play exactly like that. I'm just saying that, it's on par with a really good NES game. It feels really tight, really deliberate, really good. Definitely give it a look if you have a chance. As for other games I've been playing, well, it's basically been two games. The first one is actually a mod for Quake called Quake 1.5. I don't think it's controversial to say that Quake 1 was kind of where, like, id Software started to miss the mark a little bit. Like, Quake 1 was super underwhelming for me because it was kind of just more Doom. And, like, Doom was fine. Doom was good. Doom was, like, genre defining or whatever. But when they move on from Doom, you kind of expect them to do something a little bit different, a little bit new, kind of maybe evolve the genre again. And Quake is just Doom again. It's a lot of the same guns. It's a lot of the same ideas. Now there's like polygons, so you can do floor over floors and things like that. You can build like actual 3D environments, which is nice, but not like actually super necessary, I don't think. Like, I mean, it's great that levels can be bigger and more complex, but at the same time, if you play a lot of those retro first-person shooters, levels can actually get a little too complex at sometimes. So, telling me that, Quake, we can make so much more complex levels, it's like, I don't know if that's really like the best thing to hear or not, because, I've played Duke Nukem 3D. I know how complex some of those kind of levels can get, and it's kind of a nightmare. And like Quake had kind of a troubled development anyway. I mean, if you don't really know the story, and I kind of don't know the story myself, but Quake was intended to be like a completely different game. It was originally supposed to be like this RPG or whatever. And at some point, they just decided, screw the RPG, screw all this story that we've been setting up. We'll just make it another first-person shooter like Doom. And, that kind of ended up being a bummer, at least for me, because it wasn't as tightly polished as Doom was. It was this weird sort of messy game with like all these like almost sort of clashing art styles. You had like eldritch horror levels, you kind of had like these castle levels, you had like these future tech levels, and all of it just didn't really go together very well. I mean, there's like other things to do with Quake where, just parts of it don't feel entirely finished. The original release of Quake only has like 2 boss battles. It has a boss at the end of the first episode, and it has a boss when you beat the game, and there's nothing in between that. So it feels like a very messily put together sort of game. Quake 1.5 kind of fixes all of that. It's kind of a mod sort of like Brutal Doom in the sense that it kind of just amps everything up to the next level. It kind of revamps the look and feel of everything, but unlike Brutal Doom, it's not like this childish over-the-top sort of thing. If you're not like in the know, actual fans of Doom kind of tend to hate Brutal Doom for being, just kind of silly and stupid, but not. It's also something to do with the creator, Sergeant something or other. I don't remember his whole internet handle, but that guy, like the creator, is also kind of a jerk. I think I heard at one point that he used like real photos of dead bodies in the Brutal Doom mod at one point. It's a very, it's not a good scene for Brutal Doom. I haven't played Brutal Doom in a while, after I kind of caught wind that people said the creator was kind of a jerk. It was not very hard to disown that mod. It's nice that it's so big and bombastic and whatever, but it's also just like, it's a little too much, I think. Going back to classic Doom, as it were, wasn't very hard. And there are kind of like mods now that sort of fill in the gaps, There's like Beautiful Doom, which kind of, adds all this extra gore, smooths out all the animations in the game, kind of makes it look like Brutal Doom, but you just don't get like all the finishers and, everything else. But I'm getting away from my point here. Quake 1.5 is kind of like Brutal Doom in that sense that it kind of, everything's a little more bloody, everything's a little more punchy, all the weapons have been redone and revamped and rebalanced, but it's not that kind of childish, over the top, super ridiculous to the point of being silly sort of level of violence. There's no like finishing moves or anything like that. In Quake 1.5, it's just a very like focused experience. It adds like tons of new enemies. It like reworks a bunch of the maps, rebalances everything. You have, I think I said, new variants of enemies. You have old enemies that have new attacks. It just completely changes Quake into something that is still understandably and identifiably Quake, but just better, right? It looks better, it plays better, it feels better, it's creepier, it's harder, it's more challenging. But not, like, me, I tend to be kind of a stickler for difficulty balancing. I get bent out of shape when I feel like something is unreasonably difficult for no reason. I do not feel this way about Quake 1.5. I've been playing through that game on normal difficulty, and I played through probably about 3/4 of that game in roughly a weekend. That's how much of this I've been playing. And to put that in perspective, that is probably more Quake 1 than I've played since Quake 1 came out on the Dreamcast in 2002. When Quake, like a source port of Quake, came out on the Dreamcast, way, way, way back when Dreamcast Homebrew was still like the hot, interesting thing for people to be doing, I played through all of Quake 1 on the Dreamcast. Not with a controller, I don't think. I think by that point I might have had my Dreamcast keyboard. So I think I ended up playing through the whole game on the keyboard. No mouse, just the keyboard. Which like isn't so difficult anyway because, Quake 1 is technically from the era before mouse look became standardized. But I ended up, marathoning all 4 episodes on the Dreamcast in like a single night, and it was miserable. I hated it. You know, those later levels get to be like disgusting and gross and stupid and ugly and boring. Quake 1.5 fixes so much of that. It kind of brings it up to the same standards, I'd say, with like modern retro indie first-person shooters. Games like Dusk and Wrath or Ion Fury. Games like that. These sort of brand new games made in old engines or made to look like they're in old engines. But with like better gameplay and stuff like that. That's what Quake 1.5 feels like right now. And it's just, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's so much fun. They, in addition to, I said all the new enemy variants, all the new moves for old enemies, they redid all the weapon models. You also have like a new melee kick, like, it's Duke Nukem or whatever, where you push like a button on your keyboard and you give someone a boot to the face and you kind of clear space for yourself. Just very, 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 very fun. It totally like refreshes Quake in a way to where I will never play Quake any other way than in Quake 1.5. It also adds, I forgot to mention, it also adds a bunch of new interim boss fights. Originally I said, Quake 1 had one boss at the start of the game and it had one boss at the end of the game. Quake 1.5 adds 2 more boss fights at the end of each episode. There's a new boss at the end of episode 2 and there's a new boss at the end of episode 3. It is very, very cool. It does eventually get pretty hard, I'll say. Now that I'm probably somewhere in the middle of the 4th and final episode, it's really starting to kick my butt appropriately, but, that's to be expected. I'm near the end of the game. And with games like this, as long as I crank on it long enough, eventually I'll hit a point where I'll finish the levels that are giving me trouble. There are still sticking points in this game. There are like really annoying enemies towards the end of Quake 1. There's like these exploding slimes that are really annoying. Those are still in Quake 1.5, unfortunately. I would have really liked for them to be like rebalanced or removed or something, but they weren't. So, whatever. But it adds so many other elements that it kind of doesn't matter. It also even kind of adds sort of an element of randomization, right? Almost kind of like a roguelike in some ways. And I know some of you are like, oh, roguelike, I'm out. And like, I don't blame you. I'm kind of burnt out on roguelikes myself. But this isn't like that. It's just the kind of thing where if you die, the next time you play that level, maybe like a really tough sub-boss kind of enemy in the middle of the level will be different. Like I said, there are different variants for enemies now. You have ogres, which are the guys with the chainsaws and the grenade launchers. Some of them have body armor, some of them have helmets on. The guys with the swords come in multiple variants that kind of, changes how they run at you. The knights, the guys in, full knight armor with swords and shields, they have variants now too, where they have, different armor, different shields, different attack patterns. And every time you die, every time you load into a map, I think it switches around all these variants. So, you might face down like a shambler, which is, kind of the strongest normal enemy in that game. And let's say you die to that shambler. The next time you load in, it might be a different variant of the shambler. There is like, a giant sort of like, I think it's like a minotaur that replaces the shambler sometimes. That has, completely different model, completely different attack patterns. So it's always just a little bit different every time you play. Not like drastically different, it's not like the whole game is procedurally generated or whatever. But it's kind of almost more like the Left 4 Dead 2 sort of randomization, where it's the same map, power-ups are in roughly the same places sometimes. Well, they're in the same place almost every time in Quake 1.5, but just every now and then, little bits and pieces will be different every time you play that level. So it's also very intensely replayable in that way. So again, very much recommend Quake 1.5. I will put it in the show notes if you want a link to download it for yourself. It can be kind of hard to set up, so I don't really blame you if you kind of have trouble with it. It's just, like I said, it's just very unclear. If you have any problems with it, like let me know, and I guess I'll write something out. I almost thought about doing a video, but I'm so backed up on videos right now. I'm not doing a video on Quake 1.5 right now. You can go ask someone else about that. But I will, if you leave a comment, I will try and at least get you set up to where it works. Because it comes with a very specific build of the Quake engine, specifically like the Dark Places branch of the Quake engine. And then it gives you like the mod folder separately to where, it's a weird thing. It does come with install instructions though, but again, those are kind of hard to read. So I don't know. If you can get it set up, Quake 1.5 is a good time, and it's kind of perfect for the Halloween season because, with all these revamped effects, all these revamped enemies, everything else, it's a much spookier game. I'll say that. The other game I've been playing a lot of is Mario Kart Tour, the mobile game, and it is a game that I both hate and will probably keep playing. Unfortunately. I know that sounds weird, but I kind of also did this with another Mario Kart game. If you ask me how I feel about Mario Kart DS, I'll tell you that I hate it. That game is terrible. I hate it. It sucks. The item balance is a mess. It's all random luck. It's a garbage game. But I also put 100 hours into it. There's a part of me that secretly loves Mario Kart DS. It is a very unfair game, but when it's not being unfair, it is one of the best Mario Kart games, as it were. It's just every now and then it decided to randomly stab you in the back, That's also kind of how I feel about Mario Kart Tour, Except that, like, it doesn't stab you in the back, it kind of nukes you from orbit, as it were. It's just... winning in races almost doesn't even matter anymore. They kind of implemented this score system, this combo system, and to progress in that game, you don't win races, you get high scores. And so it's just, obviously you get score from placing high in races, but you also get score from attacking enemies, from doing tricks, from, doing specific things within a race that are not necessarily attached to winning. So it ends up being kind of this game about, having the right combination of character, cart, and glider, because depending on who you pick, what parts you pick, it kind of influences what items you get from the roulette. And from there, it's kind of about, massaging the roulette to give you what you want. And then, to maximize your score. It's a game I would never recommend anyone actually play, much in the same way that, like, smokers will probably tell you to never start smoking. Because, once you get used to, like, the weird controls, there are moments where it seems like fun. It's just wrapped around all of these luck-based systems and even, like, subtle gambling mechanics and, the kind of, like, the terrible psychological stuff that mobile games have, right? With regards to Mario Kart Tour, I always think about a quote from the late Ryan Davis, where one time he said that even bad pizza is still pizza. And, obviously what that means is that, there's kind of like a baseline quality level where pizza is sort of better than everything else. And even if you're eating bad pizza, at least it is still pizza. And that's kind of how I feel about Mario Kart Tour. I love kart racers. I especially love the Mario Kart series, so even if Mario Kart Tour is a bad game, at least it's still Mario Kart. But just don't take that as an endorsement because it's not that. It is a very frustrating game where, if you thought rubber banding was bad in older Mario Kart games, the game, like, cheats so hard now. Because again, it's a mobile game. You're kind of supposed to, like, grind out experience points, and sometimes you race against a person with a bigger number than you, and they have to represent that somehow. You can't just beat that person easily, so they just make the AI cheat when you race against them, and it is the worst thing. So, don't play Mario Kart Tour, but don't be surprised if I keep tweeting and talking about Mario Kart Tour just the same. In terms of non-games, I watched most of the new Netflix Dark Crystal series, Age of Resistance. I don't want to talk about it too much here because there was like a giant Tumblr blog where I talked about it not too long ago. But it's really good, like really, really, really good. If you didn't like the old Dark Crystal movie because like you thought the plot was too thin or whatever, like the Netflix series is for you. It kind of goes hog wild and kind of establishing the lore of this world in like very finite detail. It goes like way above and beyond just, telling you who characters are, explaining elements in the movie. It kind of turns it almost into like Game of Thrones in a way. You have like dozens of characters, tons of villains, tons of heroes. It is like a very complex, sort of dense plot that just explains everything, all the lore in the movie, lore that goes beyond the movie. It is a very, very like dense and dramatic and visually beautiful thing. And like by doing that, it kind of retroactively makes the movie like way, way better, which is something that most prequel series don't really do. You think about like the Star Wars prequels or anything else like that. Usually if you do a prequel, it's like terrible, right? Because it's always like this kind of crazy wink and nod, like, we're setting up something that happens later. And it's like, no, that kind of sucks, because we know what happens later. You can't really hint about what happens later because we know that it happens. We know these characters live. We know the hero does this thing. Like who cares about Anakin Skywalker, right? But the way the movie played out, how thin the plot of the movie was, the little like snippets of plot the movie did have that, seemed like random and out of context at that point in time. The Netflix series kind of gets to just, play around and sort of build this sort of lavish world that, it doesn't really hint at what comes in the movie, but at the same time, watching the Netflix series, you think, well, this plays into this. And it just feels really smart and really great. And it's actually also like really great to see the Jim Henson Company back and like kicking butt again. Because I feel like they've been on the skids for a really, really long time. I mentioned this in the blog post, but Defunct Land did like a documentary on the life and times of Jim Henson. And all that really made me do was kind of realize how much Jim Henson meant to that company and to like the brand of the Muppets, I guess. When we lost Jim Henson, we lost something tremendous in this world, and his characters have kind of never recovered from that. And it's gotten worse over time too, Things like A Muppet Christmas Carol were fine, people will stan Muppet Treasure Island, obviously. But kind of after that era, Muppets from Space, which, I kind of like Muppets from Space. It's a weird movie. It's a little too, it kind of doesn't know what it wants to be. It's that kind of movie, it's sort of like, is this for kids? Is this for adults? It never really finds that kind of, happy middle ground that I think a lot of Jim Henson's stuff did. And then, we had other Muppet series after that. They did that sort of weird Office-style reboot where it was like a pseudo-reality show. I heard that was super weird. Obviously, they did the Happy Time Murders, which was an adult puppet movie full of like the most disgusting sex jokes, and it was just apparently just absolutely terrible. There wasn't anything in that movie beyond, hey, look, puppets are for kids, and we're doing things that are very explicitly not for kids. That's the only joke we have, and we're going to repeat it for 2 hours. That's apparently what that movie was. But the Dark Crystal, I said Muppets from Space had trouble walking that Jim Henson line. of kind of being for everyone, for, being serious enough for the adults, but also not really leaving the children behind. Because, Jim Henson hated being pegged as this guy who only did kid stuff. That's kind of what led to the Dark Crystal originally, is that, he wanted to prove that he was more than just Sesame Street. And the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, like, actually nails that tone super, super well. It has very adult themes. I want to say that it even might have like blood at certain points. It is very much something for adults. It is very scary and gross and weird at a lot of different points. But it's the sort of thing where, like, if you're 13, 14, 15, you'd probably also still really like it as well. And it is, I cannot recommend it enough. It is very, very good. If you have Netflix, please check it out. Please watch the movie first. You probably could also watch the movie after the Netflix series. But yeah, I haven't finished the Netflix series. I hear that there are some things, maybe in the last 2 episodes, that I haven't seen yet, that do sort of maybe contradict the movie a little bit. Like, there's an implication that they might redo the movie as the second season of the TV series, or the Netflix series rather. But, watch the movie first, then watch the Netflix series to get like this whole perspective on what's going on in the movie, what sets up what happens in the movie, how things in that world got to be the way they are. Definitely watch it. And I myself, I just said I haven't seen the last 2 episodes. I really need to see the last 2 episodes, because I was powering through it pretty well, and then I got really busy with Sage, and I got really busy capturing all this video for the Sonic 3 thing, writing the Shenmue script, things like that. And those last 2 episodes of The Dark Crystal have kind of been on the back burner ever since. And I need to, force myself to sit down and finish that series sooner rather than later. Because it's worth it. Again, be sure to watch it if you can. Final thing. I watched Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark with some friends the other day. And by that, I mean the movie, the brand new movie that just came out in theaters. And that's an okay movie. I wouldn't say it's great. I wouldn't really say I'd recommend it to anyone. Like, don't go see it in the theaters at the very least. It's not a bad movie. It's not a movie that I hate. It's just, like I said, it's very okay. It kind of feels like the people making that movie saw the Goosebumps movie with Jack Black and kind of wanted to make a version of that for older kids, with more like actual horror themes and things like that. So, this is a movie where all your favorite monsters from a series of scary books, they come to life and kind of team up to wreak havoc in a small town or whatever. They kind of chase around some kids or whatever. Except that this time, unlike Goosebumps, people actually die. The kids like swear. There's a little bit of blood every now and then. It's still a PG-13 movie, so, they can't get like too extreme with the gore or the swearing. But they really push that envelope about as far as it would go without them getting an R rating. There are some very nightmarish and horrific scenes in this movie that are worse than blood and gore, let's say. And, that's cool, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I didn't hate the movie. The main issue I have with it is like the child actors themselves, the cast of main characters. They kind of remind me of like a Nickelodeon live action sitcom. So, like a show like iCarly or Drake and Josh or Corey in the House, those kinds of characters that are like super over the top, kind of almost like living human cartoon characters with like one-dimensional personality traits. That's who the people in this movie are, the kids in this movie. You've got like the gross out kid, and you've got the button-up nerdy kid, and they are just like so cartoonish in their personalities that, I ended up in that kind of unenviable position where I was kind of rooting for the monsters to kill them off. No spoilers as to whether or not they do. But you kind of get into the state where it's just like, shut up. Stop making poop jokes. Stop making, complaining about wanting to eat. We get it. You're the comedy relief. You're kind of this slob. You're kind of this idiot. Stop being that personality. Stop. Be a person. Be a human being. And that never really happens in that movie. They are all just that one note that they play very loudly over and over and over and over again. But yeah, not the worst movie I've ever seen, but not the best either. If you have like Netflix or Hulu or something, and it shows up there one day, maybe watch it there. But don't like spend money to see it in the theaters. Don't spend money to buy it. It's just merely okay. Something I said on Twitter right after I watched it is, it kind of feels like the movie that a kid today will see, like a 14-year-old kid, sees in the theater today because they beg their parents to go take them to see it. And then, 15, 20 years from now, he's writing an article on why it was the best horror movie of his era. Because, he was at the right age where it seemed like super edgy in all the right ways. It almost kind of has like a Goonies quality to it in that way, where it's not really a very good movie, but for the right people in the right place at the right time, years from now, it will be seen as a cultural touchstone, even though it's not really a good movie. That is very much how I would describe The Goonies, and, maybe also a movie like The Monster Squad. I love Monster Squad. It's a movie that I watch almost every Halloween, almost religiously, but it's not a really great movie. I say Monster Squad is probably better than The Goonies. If I had to throw down that gauntlet, here on this podcast in the very last 5 or 10 minutes. But yeah, this Scary Stories was fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. But that's going to be it for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can obviously, I'm really bad at saying this when we get to the end of the podcast. You can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter @BlazeHedgehog. I have a Tumblr blog where you can ask me questions. There's a new post every single day. Usually about video games, sometimes about movies, sometimes about whatever. You can also donate to this Patreon if you are not a Patreon donor. Sorry to current donors for me, harping on this so much. But you can go to patreon.com/BlazeHedgehog. Not only will you get podcast episodes early, but you'll get a chance to ask questions on this podcast, send me messages, have me read them out over the air. Maybe I'll talk about them. Maybe they'll lead to a very interesting off-the-cuff rambling session, kind of like I'm doing right now. But that will wrap it up for this October edition of the Patreon Party People podcast, and I will see you, hopefully, in November. Bye for now.